Hey everyone, it's your girl Maddie here, aka Beaver Mosh, and today I'm joined with Vok of Coffin Nail. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, glad to be here.
So, last month you put out a record, The Hanged Man. I talked about it on the show. I enjoyed it quite a bit. How has the reception been for it so far in your view?
Interesting, actually. So there, there's definitely phases to my work, and what I found is the people who approach the band as a grind band, which
Hmm.
is not necessarily how I approach it, weren't necessarily interested or weren't really getting what was going on. But the people who have been following me for a while as a black metal musician,
Yeah.
and the people who are into death metal seem to think it's pretty pretty cool because of I guess the influence they picked up the influences and things like that that happened throughout the album. So
Yeah, no, that's kind of what I was going to ask you first. So when I hear your music,
mhm.
first off, it's filthy. That's a compliment. Uh, I hear grindcore and I hear death metal, but I also maybe some crust punk influences and kind of a blackened sheen. Is there a specific sound you were trying to define the record as?
I mean, this one there were specific things I was going for.
Hmm.
They're tied up thematically into everything that was happening, but I mean, generally speaking, I approached Coffin Nail. I was talking to a couple of people recently, and it kind of explained that I view the band as sort of like if you went to go see the Crusher tour in 1989, and
Hmm.
Sarcophago and Septic Death were also on the list. So you have
Yeah.
Morbid Angel, there's Carcass, there's Napalm Death, obviously. Bolt Thrower, Sarcophago, and Septic Death are like really kind of like the poles that I
Yeah.
pull from generally.
Classic
Uh,
names.
yeah, yeah. There's definitely a lot of. I think the big thing is really probably like there's just a sense of violence throughout,
Sure.
which is definitely what I try to portray. But with this most recent album, it was leaning heavily into. I'd say the biggest thing would be like the Gateways to Annihilation album from Morbid Angel.
Of course.
And then the one that I love telling people about because everyone thinks it's a shitty album is Ordo Ad Chaos by Mayhem.
Hmm.
Uh, the one that was completely not mixed at all. None of the drums were
Yeah.
triggered. And so, really, what I was trying to do was kind of there was a lot of thematic things going on within the album. And so, sonically, I was trying to portray it. So, the album's actually not mastered at all. Everything on the
Interesting.
album, it was just mixed to level. So everything was just leveled, left the way it was, just hard panned and then not mastered other than just, making sure it was loud enough for streaming. So
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned earlier in the interview, black metal, because I did look through your profile on the archives, and you do have mainly a black metal background. What kind of led you into more of this direction for this project?
would actually say that I consider Coffin Nail to be a black metal album just because I'm a
Mhm.
black metal musician.
Yeah.
I would say probably there were things I was trying to portray over time with the other main project that I was previously known for was Hag Grafe, which was
Mhm.
started off as a much more sort of blackened punk band and kind of
Yeah.
evolved over time into what Coffin Nail is. And actually, I didn't the thing that people kind of refer to the band as is a war grind band.
I've
Um,
seen that.
yeah, it wasn't really an intentional thing. It was actually, I think somebody on Reddit was the first person to actually refer to the Hag Grafe album as that. And I kind of went, that's maybe not thematically, but let's probably like sonically where I was going with the project. And so there's
Sure.
very much like the four poles of the band are black punk, war, and grindcore. And so it's really like, some people probably think of the band as a grind band or maybe even a death metal band, depending on what
Mhm.
my like influences are really showing whenever I'm doing an album.
Sure.
But I really approach it as atmosphere and black metal first. It's all meant to be black metal.
Yeah, yeah, and you want to be the first band to approach themselves and position themselves as a black metal band, but like have those grind touchstones or at least like project that. And now Necroth kind of comes to
Mhm.
mind a little bit.
That
Um,
the first album, Codex Necro, I
yeah.
was writing for a webzine when that came out. and I got an advanced copy of it, and that album scared the crap out of me. I didn't know.
It's
I think it was probably like 17 at the time when it came out, and it literally was terrifying. And still, like, it's one of those things that I go back to on a regular basis because that sense of it's just caustic,
yeah,
and it's digital in the most vile way possible. I think another band that I always kind of go to from that era that sort of has that same sense to me is Necrophagia. Like
hmm
the stuff that can't happened not so much when Phil Anselmo was in the band, but when Free Diablo took over as guitarist, it became a very sort of solid state sound. If for people who play guitars, I'm sorry, definite difference in tone between solid state and tube amps, and that really shows through. It becomes like an artificial, weird, uncanny valley sort of thing. Codex
yes,
Necro definitely hits that. Necrophagia. They're actually both bands that I kind of I try and bring in at least from an aggression standpoint, but also like an ugliness standpoint, and kind of rely on those things when writing.
100%, 100%. Quick, just for clarification, minor detail. I've seen this record stated coming out of two different places. On your Bandcamp, it says Portland, but like on the archive and some other places, it says you're in Florida. Do you want to kind
Mm.
of give some clarity to that real quick?
Yeah, no. So I'm in Portland now. I
Yeah.
moved here um, in August.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, my family and I, we moved here in August. Uh, the album was the lyrically was written after that, where a lot of it touches on things about leaving Florida. So I grew up in Florida. I mean, I have a giant alligator tattoo on my arm. I got married in an orange grove, which is about the most Floridian thing you can
Yeah.
do. So it is. I'm definitely Florida white trash for the like the reference to true love. I'm Florida. So like there's a lot of me that's tied up in that state, and I'm happy to be here. I'm enjoying things being up here in Portland, but uh there was a lot of feelings about leaving, reasons
Sure.
for leaving, unresolved feelings about where things were going. I think probably every single album I've written as a musician has referenced storm season in some way, which is a big
Yeah.
part of living in Florida. Hurricanes are a big thing. That there was actually a Haggrave demo that had just sticking a microphone outside during a hurricane and picking some of them up and putting them on there. Um, that whole like being from Florida is a big part of who I am, and
Yeah.
where I am today. And so actually this album really lyrically, even though I don't really publish lyrics, touches primarily on my feelings around leaving, which is why it's not mastered at all. It was meant to come off as raw because I still felt really really raw about leaving in general.
That's okay. So that makes a ton of sense, and that's fascinating, and that's interesting to me because Florida, I mean, primarily in death metal, but metal in general, Florida for like American metal is has a lineage. Like it's like kind of iconic in there, but also especially in contemporary circles, there's a lot going on in Portland. So there's a lot you're drawing from there.
There's I would say an impressive amount of things going on in Portland right now. Just being able to kind of go to shows on a regular basis
Yeah,
that I normally wouldn't get to see. Lifting, honestly, there's a couple people who are involved with labels or bands and things like that I hang out with regularly that you didn't really interact with a whole lot before coming up here. People I work out with who are musicians. I'm going to a show this weekend with a musician that I met, after coming here.
sure.
It's it's crazy how much is happening here. There's a lot of stuff like that happening in Florida. But Tampa is, I don't know, it's sort of fractured right now. There's no real unifying sound aside from like some of the grindcore stuff happening out in St. Pete. There's still some, like there's an older death metal crowd of guys
Yeah,
just the Brass Mug, which is the main place down there. There's a lot of stuff happening down in Miami. Caveman Cult is one of them. The guys around that band have a lot of stuff happening, but it's spread out. Like Miami's 6 hours away from Tampa. Jacksonville is like 5.5 hours away from Tampa. So it's hard to kind of get a cohesive like vibe from that entire state.
sure. my talking about Portland, one of my favorite records that came out last year, it was, I think it was probably in like top 5 favorite albums of the year, was that new Triumvir Foul, just like that super dissonant death metal
Mhm.
straight out of Portland. But anyway, I'm interested in the lyrics here because I did read through them a bit, and sifting through, I sense this like vicious, sort of violent confrontation with power. Am I reading that right, or is there something I'm missing?
Yeah, so I would say that on this one, so everything when I'm writing lyrics, there's multiple facets to everything. There's the over like the top level is really it comes off as a cult. There's a lot of references to the occult,
Hmm.
Thelema specifically. This album really relied a lot on a couple different grimoires. So a lot of works of Dilemma and the tarot card. The Hangman itself is a tarot card.
Hmm.
And so like that's the overall sheen. Below that, there's a lot of sense of politics in there. Like I don't necessarily. It's hard to explain. I myself have a very political view of the world, or politics really influence a lot of what how I view the world.
Right.
But I don't really fall into the crowd of people who are big on sloganeering. Like I'm never going to be like an anti-flag type where I'm coming out and
Right.
seeing is it racist cops, racist judges, whatever. Like it's
Yeah.
like I'm deep into a lot of that politics, but I'm not necessarily going. I think you hear a lot of metalheads will turn off when you start kind of approaching things in that way. There's a lot of bands in like the I guess the RABM space, like the anarchist side or the red side will come out and they'll say, my here's my album Conquest of Bread. Listen to it. And it's just like a picture of like you know, whatever, some Soviet troops or something on the front of it. And it's like, I'm happy for you that that's your aesthetic, but if your ultimate goal is to kind of come out and project, speak to people in the language that they want to, or I'm sorry, not project, but kind of grow your ideas or grow the directions you or the group of people that listen to you or maybe agree with you or kind of prove your point across the board, speak to people in the language that they want to be spoken to. So really at the top you'll have that is sort of a cult aspect,
Right.
which is something that I'm deeply into. But below that, there's a political aspect that kind of drives things, and really at the heart of everything though is the personal. And so that's actually been a unifying theme across all 4 Coffin Nail albums. There's a personal journey kind of applied to a macro like sociological perspective,
Sure.
and then with just a really nice sheen of like occultism and devil worship and other shit like that just right over the top of it.
Classic metal.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned RABM. I am in I have relations with like people involved in kind of that anti-fascist black metal network. I work that subreddit that's pretty prominent. I've seen your music posted there a couple times, but I also appreciate, and it's kind of something I do too, where I don't keep what I think like a secret, but I don't make it like this is not about the politics, but I existing doing the show is political, and I try to at least not talk about the shitty bands and give a lot of coverage to bands who I think have something good to say. And it just kind of sounds like you have a similar perspective when it comes to like you're not going to put yourself out as a political project, but you do have these viewpoints that you are not going to hide.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever like if you were to come to me and say like are you where do you fall on the spectrum or
Yeah,
like what do you like I mean I could talk about labels or whatever it is, but if you were to say like hey, do you want to do X to help out the cause, whatever
right.
that cause is, like I'm interested in doing it. Try and give like if I for this album I printed CDs after I paid the CDs off. Now everything goes to all the money. I have a job. I don't need money from this band, so all this money is
Yeah,
going to charity,
yeah,
specifically Life After Hate, which is It's a charity that does prison outreach to de-radicalize people who've fallen into uh, just like racist prison games and gangs
Yeah.
like that. But like working on the Overgrow to Overthrow compilation with Austin Lunn um, was a big thing where I got to actually thankfully developed like a pretty good relationship with him, where he's been able to kind of teach me that activism doesn't need to be like a blunt force. Like you don't need to come out with a sledgehammer and then
Yeah.
smash, well, not necessarily smash windows. This is a poor metaphor, but I mean, like you don't need to and just with a megaphone just repeatedly yell at people and say certain things to get them to follow you. You can just lead by example, or you can do what you're able to do to kind of help out the causes that you want to help. And so yeah, like I don't people turn off. Like I know that there I know for a fact that there have been like Nazis who bought my music,
Yeah.
just seeing stuff pop up online, going back years. I have actually had people who, musicians who, the RABM crowd, if they knew that, like, they reached out to me to say that they like my music, would probably not be happy about it. But like, I'm not trying to preach to the choir. I want to get people interested in the things that I'm talking about by speaking to them on their level,
Yeah.
um, touching base with them and in a way that is already meaningful to them.
Yeah, sure. I love that, and that makes a lot of sense to me. I did see the cover you did with your project, the worker solidarity song, the famous one that you did with your. I'm drawing a blank. The
Oh, which side are you on?
Yeah, which side are you on? Yeah,
Yeah, it was actually money that was there was a railroad strike at the time, and just kind of raising whatever. And so honestly, it's a situation where you maybe raise like $15, $20 or whatever, but
yeah,
like I'm creating art for myself. I don't
yeah.
do it to, I'm not, I'm not trying to get on a label,
Right,
I'm not trying to tour the world. I don't really care about that. What I'm doing is I'm creating music that I want to hear. But if I can use that to do whatever, I can support other people or help out a cause in a certain way, I'm going to go ahead and do that. And so doing something like that, like doing the which side are you on, or even just donating money, from this album to, Save the Music or the Everglades Project or whatever it is, like something like that to just kind of help out in any way that I can. It's better than doing nothing and sitting on my ass all night.
fantastic. Um, so how do you go about writing the stuff? Do you stumble on a riff and kind of build around that? Do you find a lyrical idea first? Like, what's the process? What are the building blocks?
It's funny is I'm almost constantly in writing mode. I'm probably like 5 or 6 tracks into the new album already, and probably won't
Mhm.
be out next year. Hopefully won't be out. Maybe I'll slow myself down, but I'm not touring or anything, so I can just kind of constantly work on stuff. It
Yeah,
usually starts with, if I have a riff, that might be one thing, but typically what I like to do is kind of I write it's a D beat song almost usually. It's to
mhm,
maintain that energy throughout. And so just writing a straight D beat song for like figuring out melodies and how I want to do chord changes and things like that. Then after the song is done, rewrite it. And it's almost it's almost always like write a D beat song and then go, no, it's not black metal enough. Let me write a black metal song over the top of that. And then going back and be like, no, it's too artsy fartsy. Like it sounds like Emperor or something like that. So let me
yeah,
go, it's like, okay, let me do knuckle dragging, like drop tune power chords, and it'll start sounding like Carcass or like early Napalm Death, and then tossing in like death metal riffs or whatever in after that. And so like maybe a song goes through 2 to 5 rewrites before I'm like, okay, this is done. And then I'll write a whole album, and then I'll come back 2 or 3 weeks later, and then I'll throw 3/4 of it out and then start over again. And it's just a constant refining, going back and forth. This new one was trying a whole bunch of like, I purposely don't practice music. I don't like sit around and play like practice scales or anything like that. And I don't have a a concept of really music theory beyond just rudimentary stuff that I picked up over the years. But this time I wanted to do certain things, and I think leaning on Gateways to Annihilation as an influence on this, because it's one of the most Florida sounding records
Yeah,
ever. The sounds at the start of that with the insects, the cicadas, that's what it sounds like in Central Florida. You hear it
sure.
all the time. And so going into that album, one of the biggest things that Trey Azagthoth was doing was relying on polyrhythms more and more over time. And I wanted to get myself out of the mindset of like polyrhythms were a thing that jazz guys were into and writing like crappy jazz metal projects or whatever it
Yeah,
is. So how could I make that interesting to me? So there's a lot of polyrhythms with like palm muting and things like that. A lot of rhythmic changes that I wouldn't have done previously. And just really trying to like sit down and think about what I was doing before instead of just going, okay, this note sounds good to this next to this note or whatever it is. So
hmm. I mean, the record did, for me, take some turns. I mean, there's a, there's a saxophone. What led you to go there? How did that end up? Like, how did you find? How did you, in your mind, think, well, this instrument, I'm gonna make this work, and then how did you make it work?
So I'd been wanting to do it for a long time.
Yeah,
It was adding in just free jazz in general. It's a pretty common thing in grindcore. If you look, Napalm Death has used John Zorn quite a bit, and then John Zorn has been in
yeah,
a couple of grind jazz projects.
yeah,
And I do like, don't get me wrong, like I do like jazz. I feel like a lot of the people who approach metal from a jazz perspective have no
yeah.
clue how to write metal, and so it usually doesn't work. And so I enjoy that breaking of rules mindset. It's funny, even
Hmm.
though I don't really know the rules. And so I've been wanting to use free jazz for a while, specifically saxophone. And I ran across a video on YouTube. The guy that is credited on the album is his YouTube handle. He just said, "Hey, here's some me playing free jazz saxophone for like 10 minutes. I don't care what anyone." Somebody asked, like, "Can I sample this?" He goes, "I don't care. Anyone can use it for whatever you want." So uh,
Fascinating.
I went ahead and I just grabbed the sample and used it, and then sent him a message and said, "Hey, I use this on this album." Um, I want to do it like the dissonance and the change up and it was something that was going to break things up from what I'd done previously, where I was very previously like really reliant on using organs, organ keys, things along those lines. I wanted something outside the realm of what you would think of, like, people thinking war metal, or people thinking black metal. Like, how
Right.
does this sound weird and, whatever.
So, fun question for you. What are some of your favorite grind records if you were to consider this kind of a grind project that's being marketed? Like, I have an Insect Warfare poster up on my wall. Like, yeah,
I definitely say it's probably from enslavement to obliteration is probably
yeah,
like the one that I hit the most often. And it always ends up feeling like that's one of the early things that pops up as an influence in different albums when I'm writing it. Beyond that, like you have your baseline stuff. So it's like Repulsion, absolutely fantastic.
yeah.
Uh,
I own that.
yeah, it's an amazing
Yeah,
album. Reek of Putrefaction.
of course.
So beyond that, you're starting to really kind of like get into like weird random sounds or tracks that I picked up on. Like from this album, I'm trying to think back. I had a playlist of stuff that I was listening to beforehand. I'm trying to think now what I was going through, and Impetigo was another one. Yeah. Horror of the Zombies is definitely another album I would say touch on, whether or not you consider that grind. It's sort of like in that same like mincecore, proto mincecore, early gore grind, whatever.
Yeah,
And then just Mortician, which if you consider them death metal or grindcore or whatever, and it's just that constant pummeling and destruction that comes from it. And so, I mean, I didn't even come in thinking ahead of time. I could say the other ones would be Nelt Rote and Vermin Womb, or probably like newer like black grind albums that I would say like
yes.
two really heavy ones, and then to a certain extent, along with Anal Nothrock, would be Fuck Pig. If you've ever hit that, which is sort of the same group of people. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know. I tend not to try not to stick totally to a realm of these are the albums I'm hitting. It's more like a band, and I'll like I try to approach things as I'm going to sit down and listen to this band and kind of grab a certain vibe from them, and that's what I want. I think it's a great way to approach music because people, especially nowadays, tend to get so stuck on oh, this is the one good album from this band, and then they never approach anything else, or they're like,
Sure.
oh, we're bothered to check it or whatever. When another example that I actually cite pretty often is Damage 381 by Extreme Noise Terror.
Hmm.
So they're a crust punk band, or they were in the 80s, but this is like a straight up death grind album that Barney Greenway from Napalm Death is singing on. It's like straightforward just destruction, and it's harrowing, and nobody gives a shit. Everyone thinks it's terrible because they're like, oh, somebody told me 10 years ago that this is not a good punk album.
Sure.
You don't realize like, oh, it's an amazing death grind album. It's just absolutely killer. So I way off topic.
No, no, it's great. And you mentioned that Vermin Room project. That's a Primitive Man side project, if I'm correct. Or yeah, no, that record was fantastic.
Yeah,
Uh,
both those albums are really, really good. Both the Nelt Road albums are really good as well too.
sure.
Highly recommend them.
So you have multiple projects. You have this. So what do you have coming up? What's cooking? What's next? Whether it's with Coffin Nail or something else you're working on.
So I mean, I'm sort of writing for Coffin Nail right now. I think the other one that I hear about often is Vol. So Vol is a project that I do with Dee from Akasha and Leonoka. People who know him, he plays guitar, I sing, and it initially started out as, hey, I have this thing that sort of sounds like craft. Do you want to mess around with it? And it's turned into something else entirely. So we have been, I guess now, for 2 years writing the second album. I don't know if it's ever going to happen, but it is just like like send him riff after riff. He sends me stuff, and we touch back and forth. And so like that's constantly being worked on, but I don't know if it's I don't even know if it's ever going to happen. Beyond that, there are, I would say it's whenever the mood strikes. There are some bands that I have that I only write stuff for when I'm in a certain way. Um, Jur specifically is probably like one where I'm like so depressed about life or so like anti existence at that point that if an album comes out, I'm probably not in a good space mentally at that time. And I
Hmm.
won't announce anything. And it's like an example of an album I don't even say anything to anyone about. I just put it up on Bandcamp and let it go because it's a way to get out whatever I'm feeling at that time.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I mean, I'm writing stuff for Coffin Nail, but there's nothing really like specific that's happening at the moment.
Sure, sure. Well, I will be on the lookout for the next Coffee Nail project because I enjoyed this one quite a bit.
Thank you.
That is all the questions I had. Is there anything you wanted to leave my viewers with before I let you go?
Think more critically about music.
Right.
Uh, I would say don't just like say, oh, I like this thing this one time, or I didn't like it the first time I heard it. Dig back into it, challenge yourself to listen to stuff. Um, you know, you're probably robbing yourself of a lot of things if you are approaching things that way, or you're only looking at like rate your
Hmm.
music lists for what you should listen to.
Yeah.
And then as an artist, I will say it sucks when people just come in and they're like, uh, oh, there's somebody I know, another artist I know actually commented a while back and said that it's really great when you spend 6 months of your life on something and then somebody just comes in and says, oh, this slaps. And it's like, I'm glad you like it, but give a little more effort, dive in. I've had people ask me straight up like what Coffin Nail is about, and I've never hidden anything about what the band's about. I've never, aside from not publishing lyrics, and there's a specific reason for that.
Yeah.
Like I don't hide anything about it. It's all in plain view. So if you sit down, you look at track titles or song or album titles or whatever it is, or even references. Like I like to put up the fact that I have influences or reading. There's a reading list in this new album CD, in the CD booklet. Um, Go out, try and figure out what the artist was trying to say. Don't just go like, oh, this is good, and then never bother to listen to it again because you
Right.
cataloged it. Really sit down and ask, did this person achieve what they were trying to do? And then I think you're going to probably engage with music on a much deeper level than you might have previously.
I love that. That's it's an incredible insight. Thank you for that. Yeah. So once again, Vok's Coffin Nail. Thank you for joining me. My name is Maddie, aka Beaver Mosh, and I'm signing off.